Will you do that, Bianca? The funny thing is better that they go away. I don't think.
Would you please welcome Bianca Jagger?
May 1971. St. Tropez. Bianca Jagger descended those stairs in a white Yves Saint Laurent tuxedo with no shirt underneath, and cameras captured what looked like absolute perfection. Next to her stood Mick Jagger, and the world watched their fairy tale wedding. But years later, Marianne Faithfull would write 5 words that explained everything. Mick married himself. And Bianca said something even more haunting.
It made me very angry, very frustrated. I thought it was.
My marriage ended on my wedding day. For decades, nobody understood what she meant by that. At 80 years old, Bianca Jagger has finally revealed the truth that destroyed everything. And it started with a document Mick placed in her hands hours before that ceremony. Hours before that ceremony in St. Tropez, while crowds screamed outside and flashbulbs exploded through the windows, Mick Jagger handed Bianca a document.
Was the fact that I had been to China with Holston in 1980.
It was a prenuptial agreement, and the timing couldn't have been more calculated or more cruel. She was 4 months pregnant, exhausted from the media frenzy, and surrounded by chaos she never asked for. The agreement was written in English, which created an immediate problem since Bianca spoke Spanish and French. But her English wasn't strong enough to understand legal terminology.
I have absolutely nothing to do with that image, except probably that I love life.
Nobody offered her a proper translation. Nobody gave her time to think, and nobody seemed to care that she was being asked to sign away her future under extreme duress. The clause was brutal in its simplicity. If they divorced, Bianca would have 0 rights to anything Mick owned. Not his music royalties, not his properties, not a single penny beyond whatever the court might grant in basic support. She signed it because backing out meant facing public humiliation on a scale most people can't imagine. The guests had already arrived. The press was everywhere, and walking away would have destroyed her in ways she couldn't even begin to process. But in that moment, something shifted in Bianca's mind. She realized she wasn't marrying Mick Jagger the person. She was marrying his shadow, his fame, his world where she would always be invisible. Mick's father stood off to the side during the ceremony, visibly uncomfortable, and later, he told a reporter something that revealed how even his own family saw through the spectacle. "I hope my other son doesn't become a superstar." The father of one of the world's most famous rock stars was expressing hope that his other child would never have to live this way, and that alone reveals how even Mick's family understood what kind of circus this had become. Music journalist David Hepworth, who covered the wedding, didn't mince words when he described what he witnessed. He called it the shabbiest free-for-all in the history of both rock and marriage, and said it was skin-crawlingly embarrassing for everyone involved. The couple had invited 4 photographers to document the day. 100 showed up. French law allowed any member of the public to enter public buildings, which meant the town hall became a war zone of cameramen fighting for position. What nobody filmed was the chaos that erupted inside when Keith Richards burst through the door shouting profanities about a fight breaking out in the street. Bianca, 4 months pregnant, broke down in tears when she saw the hordes of paparazzi crammed behind the mayor's desk. Officials had to use force to remove them. Meanwhile in London, Marianne Faithfull, Mick's ex-girlfriend, lay unconscious in a police cell after swallowing Valium and vodka because she couldn't handle the fact that Mick was marrying someone else. The ceremony was delayed by 90 minutes, while officials argued with Mick's representatives about whether to cancel the whole thing. And when it finally started, the actual legal marriage took less than 10 minutes. Jade Jagger was born in October 1971, 5 months after that chaotic wedding. And that's when Bianca Pérez Mora Macias, the woman who had studied political philosophy at the Paris Institute of Political Studies, the woman who was brilliant and ambitious and had her own dreams, simply disappeared. What remained was a woman known only as Mrs. Mick Jagger. The controls started with small moments she didn't recognize as warning signs, until much later, when she looked back and saw the pattern emerging across their entire relationship. Mick would dismiss her interests with a laugh, would mock her ambitions as cute but pointless, would make her feel like everything she wanted outside of being his wife was somehow ridiculous. When Bianca tried to write a book about nutrition, something that genuinely interested her and could have been her own project completely separate from her husband's overwhelming fame, Mick's response was to laugh and ask why she would waste a year of her life doing something he considered so utterly meaningless. Wives existed for one purpose in his conservative worldview. They were meant to raise children and stay quiet while their husbands pursued greatness. Any ambition beyond that was just silly to him. Just another distraction from what he believed her real role should be. The Studio 54 era should have been Bianca's moment to shine, and in many ways it was, but that created its own problems. She began to outshine Mick at the legendary Manhattan nightclub, and he became visibly uncomfortable with the attention she was getting. People wanted to talk to her, photograph her, be near her, and Mick wasn't used to being the second most interesting person in any room. Billy Joel had dinner with the couple during this period, and the evening disturbed him so much that he went home and wrote Big Shot, inspired by what he'd witnessed at that table. When Bianca talked about Mick's infidelities years later, her description revealed the particular kind of pain that comes from being betrayed constantly, but never quite dramatically enough to justify leaving.
You don't read about people that are married and are very happy and have children and live very...
Mick slept with many women, she said, but he rarely had real affairs, and the women were meaningless to him, just bodies he used and discarded without a second thought. Once, in a moment of rage, she couldn't contain anymore. Bianca went through Mick's closet and tore every single button off every single shirt he owned. It wasn't revenge exactly, but rather the physical release of anger that had been building in her chest until she felt like she couldn't breathe. What makes Bianca's reflections most devastating is her description of how Mick saw women. He was deeply conservative despite his reputation as a rebel, she explained, and he saw all women the same way. As gold diggers, as prostitutes, as people fundamentally incapable of genuine feeling or honest motivation. Mick had created a system where Bianca couldn't trust anyone around her because everyone was either on his payroll or wanted something from his fame. May 2, 1977, Studio 54 in Manhattan. Bianca Jagger's 30th birthday party, and the world would remember this night for decades because of one image that went global within hours. Steve Rubel, who co-owned Studio 54 with Ian Schrager, had seen a magazine photograph of Bianca riding a white horse back in Nicaragua, and he thought it would be clever to recreate that moment as a birthday surprise. That horse was sedated with tranquilizers to keep it calm in the chaos of the nightclub, and someone dressed as Lady Godiva led it through the crowd. This wasn't a massive party. Only 20 people were there that night, in a venue designed to hold 3,000. Halston sat next to Mick. Keith Richards leaned against the bar. Liza Minnelli laughed with Andy Warhol, and the J played Sympathy for the Devil at Bianca's request, while lights flashed her name in giant letters across the back wall. When Bianca climbed onto that white horse, 100 photographers appeared out of nowhere, as if they'd been hiding in the shadows, waiting for exactly this moment. That image of her straddling the horse in a red halter dress became instant legend, the perfect symbol of Studio 54 excess and rock star glamour. But photographer Rose Hartman captured something else that night, something far more rare and far more telling. Immediately after Bianca dismounted from the horse, Mick kissed her. Rose later said she'd never seen another photograph of them kissing in all the years they were married. And in that one image, they looked like they were alone in the room, like they'd forgotten about the cameras and the crowd in what seemed like a perfect, intimate moment that didn't last long because then Jerry Hall appeared. Millions of people worldwide looked at that white horse and saw Bianca Jagger at the absolute peak of her power and influence. They saw a woman who could command a room, who could turn a birthday party into a cultural moment. What they didn't see was that this was actually the beginning of the end. Years later, Bianca would clarify what really happened that night, because the story had taken on a life of its own. She didn't ride into Studio 54 on a white horse like some kind of conquering warrior. Steve Rubel brought the horse to the club as a surprise, and she made what she called the foolish decision to sit on it for a few minutes. Her clarification mattered to her. The larger truth, though, never changed. That white horse wasn't a symbol of power at all. It was Bianca's last breath before she drowned. Jerry Hall, 20 years old, blonde, Texan, stood engaged to Bryan Ferry, the frontman of Roxy Music. In 1976, Mick Jagger invited both Jerry and Bryan to dinner at his London home. The attention from someone as famous as Mick flattered Bryan, but he also noticed something troubling. Mick couldn't take his eyes off Jerry. The attraction became obvious to everyone in the room, except apparently Mick himself, who seemed to think his interest remained subtle. Jerry wrote about this period in her memoir years later, and her descriptions reveal just how relentless Mick had become in his pursuit. He started showing up regularly at the house she shared with Bryan, dropping by unannounced with increasingly transparent excuses. Once, Mick chased Jerry around a ping-pong table, trying to kiss her while Bryan was in another room. Bryan walked in, saw what was happening, and physically chased Mick out of the house. On May 21, 1977, Mick and Jerry met for dinner without their respective partners, and Jerry marked that date as the true beginning of their relationship. "We would celebrate this day for the next 23 years, she wrote. Mick was still married to Bianca at this point, and the divorce wouldn't be filed for another year, but Mick had already moved on and made sure everyone knew it. Jerry represented everything. Bianca wasn't. She was 20 years old to Bianca's 32. Blonde and fair-skinned, where Bianca was dark and exotic. American, where Bianca was Nicaraguan. Jerry seemed willing to accept the kind of arrangement that Bianca had refused, where the man's infidelities were just part of the package and complaining about them was unseemly. Mick didn't hide his relationship with Jerry. He exhibited her at Studio 54, at parties, in photographs that ended up in every tabloid and magazine. This was a different kind of betrayal than the anonymous groupies and one-night stands. That's when the realization hit her with devastating clarity. She had learned to tolerate those anonymous women, to look the other way and tell herself it didn't matter, because those women meant nothing. But Jerry was different. Jerry was public humiliation. When Bianca talked about this later, you could hear the wound was still fresh decades afterward. Groupies weren't easy to accept, she said. But Jerry was my public humiliation. In May 1978, Bianca filed for divorce, citing Mick's adultery with Jerry Hall as the grounds. She wasn't acting out of anger or spite. She was acting out of survival. "You need courage to leave someone like Mick," she explained years later, and I had it. The decision wasn't easy. Bianca had been raised Catholic, and in her faith tradition, marriage was sacred and permanent. "Divorce was the greatest disappointment of my life," she admitted, because it represented a failure of something that should have lasted forever. But she didn't regret leaving because Mick is incapable of being a good husband, she said, explaining that a rock star has too much ego to ever put someone else first. The divorce proceedings revealed just how little Mick valued her contributions to their 7 years together. His lawyers fought to minimize her settlement, and when everything was finalized, Bianca walked away with approximately £1.2 million. Given that Mick's fortune at the time was estimated in the tens of millions, and given that his wealth would continue to grow exponentially in the decades to come, the settlement was insulting. Bianca could have fought harder, could have dragged it out in court and tried to get more, but she chose not to. It wasn't about the money. It was about getting out with her dignity intact and her future in her own hands. She did keep one thing from the marriage, though: the name. Bianca Jagger maintained her married surname not out of nostalgia or lingering attachment, but as a strategic choice. "Sometimes," she explained, "you must use the system that oppressed you to fight for those it still oppresses." The name Jagger gave her access and credibility she wouldn't have had as Bianca Perez Mora Macias, and she was pragmatic enough to use that advantage for the causes she cared about. In early 1979, Bianca returned to Nicaragua with an international Red Cross delegation, and what she witnessed there changed the trajectory of her entire life. The Somoza regime was brutal in its repression, and she saw firsthand the torture, the displaced families, the systematic destruction of anyone who opposed the government. It was the moment, she said later, when I could no longer stay silent. But the real transformation, the moment that defined who Bianca Jagger would become for the rest of her life, happened in Honduras in 1981. She was part of a United States congressional delegation stationed at a UN refugee camp near the border with El Salvador. The visit was supposed to be routine, a fact-finding mission where American politicians could see conditions on the ground and report back to Washington about the humanitarian crisis. Then, everything went wrong. About 40 refugees who had been captured were suddenly marched out of the camp at gunpoint by a death squad from El Salvador. These men were heavily armed with M16 rifles, and they were heading back toward the border with their prisoners. Everyone understood what that meant. Those 40 people would disappear, would be tortured and killed, and nobody would ever know their names or what happened to them. Bianca and the other members of the delegation made a decision in that moment that could have gotten them all killed. Armed with nothing but cameras to document what was happening, they followed the death squad along a dry riverbank as the armed men marched their prisoners toward El Salvador. That squad knew they were being followed, and they had to know that these Americans with their cameras represented a problem that couldn't simply be shot and buried. When both groups were close enough that voices could carry across the distance, Bianca and the delegation members began shouting at the raiders. "You will have to kill us all," they screamed. "If you take these people, you'll have to kill us too, or we will denounce your crime to the world." Armed men stopped marching and conferred with each other, and for a long moment nobody knew what would happen next. Then they made a decision. They approached the delegation, confiscated all the cameras so there would be no photographic evidence, and released all 40 prisoners. Just like that, everything changed, and 40 people who had been minutes away from execution walked free. Bianca described this as a turning point in my life, and you can understand why. She'd been the woman on a white horse at Studio 54, the famous wife of a rock star, the glamorous face in every gossip column. Now she was someone who had faced down a death squad and won. This was more than courage. This was Bianca's complete rebirth as someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Decades have passed since that divorce, and the contrast between how Mick and Bianca have spent those years tells you everything you need to know about what really mattered to each of them. Mick Jagger is 82 years old as of 2026, and he's still running across stages with the Rolling Stones, still chasing the same adrenaline high he's been chasing since the 1960s. He has 8 children with 5 different women, 7 significant relationships over the years, and not a single lasting commitment to show for any of it. In 2002, the Queen knighted him for his services to popular music, and the ultimate rebel was eventually accepted by the ultimate establishment. He had heart surgery in 2019, and he was back on stage performing within weeks because stopping would mean admitting that time was catching up with him. His current partner is Melanie Hamrick, a ballet dancer 44 years younger than he is, and they have a young son together.
But I never did that. Instead, I just thought, oh, to hell with everything, I just lead my life, and why should I pay anyone?
Mick has said publicly that family life is the enemy of creativity, which explains a lot about how he's lived his life and why his relationships always seem to fall apart. At 82, he's still singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," a song about a man who is never satisfied no matter what he gets or who he's with. Mick doesn't just sing that song, he lives it. Still searching, still restless, still empty. Bianca Jagger is 80 years old in 2026, and she has spent the decades since her divorce building something that will outlast any pop song or rock concert. In 2005, she founded the Bianca Jagger Human Rights Foundation, an organization dedicated to defending human rights, ending violence against women and girls, addressing climate change, and supporting indigenous peoples around the world. In 2003, she became a Council of Europe Goodwill Ambassador. In 2004, she received the Right Livelihood Award, which is known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, for her long-standing commitment to human rights, social justice, and environmental protection. She has testified before the United States Congress multiple times on issues ranging from war crimes to environmental destruction. She has faced death squads in Honduras, worked in refugee camps in the Balkans, defended indigenous tribes in the Amazon rainforest, and spoken truth to power in more ways than most people could list in a single conversation. Bianca never remarried, and that was a conscious choice. "Being alone is better than being invisible," she once said, and those words carry the weight of hard-won wisdom. She learned through painful experience that it's possible to be in a relationship and still be completely alone. To share a bed with someone and still feel like you're screaming into a void where nobody can hear you. She chose solitude over that particular kind of loneliness, and she built a life that gave her satisfaction in ways that Mick has apparently never found. The marriage of Bianca and Mick Jagger wasn't a romance that failed. It was a mirror that broke. Marianne Faithfull understood this back in 1971 when she wrote those 5 words. Mick married himself. He married someone who looked like him, who reflected his image back at him. And when Bianca tried to shine on her own, the mirror shattered because narcissists don't want partners, they want reflections. Jerry Hall lasted 23 years with Mick by learning something Bianca refused to learn, which was how to be invisible when necessary, how to dim her own light so his could shine brighter. Bianca wouldn't pay that price, and the marriage ended because of it. When Bianca said, "My marriage ended on my wedding day," she was revealing something profound about the moment she understood what kind of relationship she'd entered. That day, with Keith Richards shouting obscenities, with her crying over the paparazzi invasion, with the prenuptial agreement forced on her while she was pregnant and vulnerable, she realized that Mick Jagger didn't love her. He loved the idea of her. And ideas don't have voices. Ideas don't have needs or wants or dreams. Ideas exist only to serve the person who imagines them. Today, Mick Jagger at 82 is still singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction," a song about a man who never finds what he's looking for, and he lives it every day, still searching, still restless, still empty. Bianca Jagger at 80 doesn't need to sing about satisfaction, because she found it facing down death squads in Honduras, defending indigenous tribes in the Amazon, speaking for people who had no voice. The truth that destroyed Mick Jagger's perfect image is the truth Bianca has revealed by living her life exactly as she chose to live it. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is just living well. And Bianca proved that every single day since she walked away. Who really won? The woman who left the rock god, or the rock god who never understood what he lost. What do you think about Bianca's journey from Studio 54 to human rights champion? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more untold stories from rock and roll history. Thank you for watching.